Many of you in this room know of the work of Michael Fullan out of Canada, and he seems to have a habit of writing a book every year, if not every 6 months. And he's a very good friend of ours, and we work with him a lot in California, but over the years we've worked with him. And he's got a new book out that I want to use with you for a few minutes and then have Saul kind of push some research data into it, because it's another way to talk about the next question, which is to say, if that's the setup, and if that's our work, and if the data says that to change the way the union management and the management of this thing would work in such a way that we would get these kind of multiples, then of course, without original sin, we should go do it, right? And even with it, we have to go do it. We just have to pray for some grace. So here's a way that, again, I love simple models that you can hang the work on. And the piece that comes out of Coherence, the book Coherence, small book that he just published last year, is a way to, in some senses, rethink this thing again, but now moving towards action, if you will. And he studied very successful districts, and then basically tried to distill, if you will, kind of what they had in common. And he comes out with this wonderful map. Notice the clever redesign of the circle or the pyramid. I am a gifted geometrician. He basically says that what he found out of the most successful districts that he studied across the world, all right, was the following. And see what you think of this. He calls this box, and it doesn't matter really where you start, but we start here. I'm going to call this collaborative processes. And basically he says almost every place that does the deep long-term work and builds a culture and a tradition of it has in some senses a history of working together, and then the descriptors are almost always the same. It's open, it's truth-telling, it's a kind of a thoughtful way to listen and learn together, and so forth. The kind of work we do in Corona, Norco, and others in this room, Pomona, Moreno Valley. See, but we all start, you know, the lovely piece out of the morning is nobody gets to start except in a steady state that has all sorts of stuff against this kind of behavior, work, and so forth. It is, if you will, an old confrontive industrial model for the most part, and it is top-down, punitive, and God knows from above at legislative levels the same tone. All right, but despite that, we've all got a responsibility to build it with integrity, bottom up, with powerful voice, responsible voice, and everybody else's job in there is to work together to enhance that. That's a different model, and so you always are over against the steady state that says, what are you doing? What are you doing? That's our work. So you need models or frames that at least help you think about it when you get lost in the complexity of it. And his argument is simply, you must have these. Now the interesting piece, of course, is that when I first started, I thought that if you just created these, the rest would follow. Turns out that's not true. You have all sorts of other things you have to think about. All right. The second piece is the piece that Saul uses language that's really good, but I think we need to clarify it some. It's the organization has to have clarity, all right, around goals and strategies, all right? Now, the issue here for me is, in some senses, management thinks they do that, the good management. I'm saying good management. They're good men and women, and they think that this is a cognitive exercise. It is and it isn't, all right? It is not somehow kind of communicating clarity that it is a cognitive kind of asset, all right? It is having clarity, but you must use these processes to get deep ownership and involvement, and that means that you have to be ready to change these. You have to be ready to be influenced, all right? If you're not open to being influenced, it's a charade, and people smell it like this, right? instinctively. I used to gather my 3 children together to decide, these are children, fine, loving environment, all right? I say, where do you want to go for vacation this summer? To which the middle one would say instantaneously, is this a done deal or not? And you say, what? Why would I invite you to a question like that? And he says, prove it, is what he's really saying to me. I don't believe this is authentic, is what he's saying, in a loving family, all right? This thing comes with a certain amount of suspicion. The only way to heal this over the years, and it isn't even the history, any kind of exercise like this that says this is who we are, this is where we're going, and this is why, has to be joint or it simply will not be trusted. It will not be taken. Someday we'll get that. Someday we'll get that. All right? And the interesting piece that flows out of this, especially after these last 10 or 12 years around both the measurement of children and the evaluation of teachers is, if you did this right, you have to eventually have, and we talked about it just the last, you have to have real ownership around accountability. All right? Everybody's got to say yes to this, and when you say yes to this in authentic ways, then in some senses this follows powerfully, and in the top model, the top-down model, and the industrial model collude to basically erode this enormously, so that you get into that terrible dance where anybody above you is accountable not just for your work, but is accountable, God help us, for motivating you to want to do it. I mean, that's the worst displacement possible for a human being, even if you're 2. All right? It is not good to somehow kind of get in a situation where she thinks I'm accountable for her. All right? I have to keep creating a place where she understands that we're trying to get down the street, all right? And I'm not responsible for her coming down the street with me. She is, all right? Or at least jointly, we're going to work it, all right? But you can't get here, because this is what drives the work. All right? This is the internalized motivation that either makes an excellence or not. And you have degrees of it. When I say it like that, it sounds like you either have it or you don't. No. But I argue at the bottom of a lot of pyramids we go into, this thing's at about 20%, and it could be at 80%. Only because they think that the whole work and the motivation is somewhere else in the world. All right? And bad classroom, that's a definition. So I have a beautiful daughter who's a wonderful teacher, but her first job, she calls from California, she says, how come I'm teaching in such a way that I think they learn for me? That displacement is profound. And so you've got to build it somehow. The process, the how, through the what, the how gets you to this. And then the last piece that he says in this book that I think, I alluded to it earlier, but I think it really brings some wonderful clarity. The work of this profession is pedagogy. Pure and simple. It's the engagement of all learners in deep, thoughtful work. All right? You're trying to create all this safety and this deep focus and this accountability so you can go do this work. And the deep insight here is that you can't do pedagogy unless you inform the voice of the learner with you, unless you are willing to listen to her. In the moment, that's what you do. You teach off of them coming at you. But if you know what you're doing. But you basically have to do that organizationally. So you somehow, what you're trying to do in a PLC is you're trying to basically build reflective time with the adults to start working this issue. But eventually you've got to gather data from children. You do that one way or another. You bring in kind of experiments, talk to each other about how you're doing, how you're engaging, you look at results and so forth. But the simplicity and clarity of this thing, I just love. This is our work. And the last piece around that is, again, the thing that we've kind of lost. This is a joyful profession. This is fun, if you do it right. It doesn't feel like fun recently, but to interact with 30 nasty little ones every day, whether they're 18, which is or whether they're, there's a play in there, a dance, a joy that nobody gets to do. Nobody gets to do. Yeah, the content's interesting some days it isn't, but they're never not interesting. Never, all right? This is our work. And you lose it. You lose it in kind of 8 years of core curriculum. You lose it in pedagogy. You lose it in the measurement. This is the work. So that's his coherence frame. It, in some senses, just puts our organizational shift in here in another perspective.